Thank you. So let's start while the last participants join the video conference. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends, the members of the Bureau, alternates and permanent and ad hoc advisory group members, observers and the guests today. And a very special welcome to the chief economists of FAO and WFP, along with the entire high-level panel of experts of the steering committee, of the high-level panel of experts, which is meeting here in Rome in these days and is joining us today also as observers. And my special welcome to David Navarro, Special Envoy of WHO Director General on COVID-19 and Strategic Director or 4SD. You are co-leading the working group on food of the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group. And I'm also delighted to welcome Mr. Arne Cartridge from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, who is part of this effort on the subgroup of fertilizers. Well, dear colleagues and dear friends, today we have ahead of us two agenda items for our meeting. The first part, our substantive segment, as we are calling this first part of our joint meetings, will keep the focus on the impacts on global food security of the war in Ukraine. And the second agenda item, we will address the implications of the UN Food System Summit on the work of the CFS. So before proposing the adoption of the agenda and kick off our meeting, I must ask, is there any other items some of the participants today would like to add under the any other business agenda item? And if not, and I don't see hands up, then we can consider the agendas as adopted. Before starting, just a quick housekeeping reminders. Please note that, as usual, we'll be recording our meeting for the Secretariat's use only. And also note that, as we discussed previously during our last joint meeting, this substantive part of our joint discussions will be webcasted, so it will be easier for those that are not based in Rome to join and to participate in these discussions from the field, in our capitals and elsewhere. So if there are no requests for any other business for the floor now, then we'll go straight into our first agenda item. You may recall that at our last meeting in March, I proposed to have this special meeting of the Bureau and the Advisory Group in view of the deterioration of the global food systems and the prospects of the impact of the war in Ukraine on food security and nutrition, an impact that adds to the existing and the pre-existing, already existing dire situation in many communities, in many countries and regions as a result of multiple factors such as protracted crisis, the impact of climate change or the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing these days that the efforts by the international community are sustained and seeking peace first, the full respect of the humanitarian law and providing policy responses to the looming food security crisis. We are seeing these days how the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group has advanced its configuration and its work on the analysis on the impact on food, energy and financing. We're also seeing how the FAO Council at its meeting, this session on April 8th, addressed the impact of the Ukraine-Russia conflict on global food security and also related matters to FAO mandate. Notably, we are seeing how Ireland led a session of the Security Council recently under the ARIA formula on this same issue, in which our Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Michael Fakhri, and the FAO chief economist also participated. And I will give the floor to Michael and ask him to provide us a brief summary afterwards on this meeting. Of course, we have seen how the food security situation and prospects featured prominently at the IMF and World Bank spring meetings during these last days, and of course within the G7 and the G20 meetings under the Germany the presidency, of Germany and Indonesia. And while our government and our civil society, the private sector and the whole of the UN family are deploying policy responses at the different levels and under our different scopes, it is of paramount importance that we share information and analysis, or that we share what we are proposing to do and to communicate to each other. I am fully committed, you know that, to lead the CFS to work in full synergy with the efforts that FAO, IFAD and WFP here in Rome are leading, and in full communication and engagement with the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group. This is why today we will explore as well the role that the committee, that the CFS may and should play in this context. A committee that we all know it was precisely reformed to serve as a policy coordination multi-stakeholder platform in support of country-led and stakeholders' efforts. So in this part, colleagues, of this segment, of this substantive segment, we'll hear first the latest updates from FAO and WFP chief economists, as I said, from David Navarro and maybe from Arne Cartridge, about the Global Crisis Response Group and the work it's starting on the fertilizers side. So speakers, dear speakers, and before giving you the floor, note that you're also very welcome to provide your insights, if you wish, on the possible and desirable actions to be taken by the Committee on World Food Security in your remarks, even if this issue will be discussed later today. So now, and if you are on the screen, it is my pleasure, as usual, during the last sessions, to give the floor first to the chief economist of FAO, to dear Maximo. I don't see you in the screen, but probably you are somewhere around here. Maximo, FAO, if you are here, please take the floor. The floor is yours.
Hello, Chair. Mark here. No, Maximo is going to join shortly. I'll send him a note and he'll be here shortly. So if you could begin with one of the other speakers, please.
Okay, no problem. And so then we will go straight into to WFP chief economist. I don't see you on my screen first, and so I'm not sure if you're in the same situation as Maximo. But if you are here, please, Arif.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Sorry about that. So please go ahead, Arif, followed by David Navarro. The floor is yours, Arif.
Thank you, Chairperson. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I just got back from Ukraine, in fact, yesterday, and I was with our executive director, and we basically visited Odessa, which is one of the biggest ports or in the south, and we also were in Chisinau in Moldova. And I think these are sort of like the hot spots, if you will, of this crisis as we go forward. This was all I would say is on the crisis side that things are worsening, especially on the Black Sea side. And what that essentially means is that the logistics out of Black Sea are going to become more and more complicated. They were already complicated, but they will become even more complicated. The flow of commodities out of the Black Sea, particularly on the Ukrainian side, is almost zero. The freight prices of bringing commodities out from both Russian side, but also are almost 50 to 80% higher if somebody is willing to go. And this is very significant. Why? Because what we are seeing is not only that the prices of commodities are up, whether you're talking about basic staples, whether it is wheat or corn or soybean, but also it is the freight, it is the transportation cost. So what that means is that at the end of the day, as a consumer, whether you're in Lebanon or you're in Egypt or you're in South Asia or you're in Africa, your prices are high, and they're significantly higher. What we are seeing right now, just to put that in perspective, what we are seeing right now is that in 31 economies, food inflation has been over 15% year on year as we speak. We are also at the same time seeing situations where the country's abilities, capacities to import are extremely challenged. In terms of depreciation of currencies, we have seen upwards of 15% depreciation in 22 economies. So this is the time to not only look at what is happening with the food prices and affordability of commodities for consumers, but also the ability of governments to import, to provide that food at a reasonable, affordable price. This is one of the biggest challenges as we see so far. I think we, Mr. Chair, in our previous meeting, we had talked about 4 C's, what is driving, what is happening in the world. We said conflict is the biggest contributor. We have climate, we have consequences of COVID, and we had already the high costs for food and fuel before this started. Now, essentially what we are saying is that on top of those 4 C's, you can easily add 3 F's. That's the high food prices, that's the high fuel prices, and that's the high fertilizer prices. And what we are seeing being realized right now is the jeopardy to the next agricultural season, not only for Ukraine and Russia, but also for the rest of the countries, especially smallholder farmers, who will be unable to afford agricultural imports, particularly fertilizer, at the cost that it is right now. So whether you're talking wheat, whether you're talking corn, whether you're talking vegetable oil, this is a significant issue which needs to be dealt with right now, because if we don't, our 2022-23 agricultural marketing season will be in jeopardy. And this is not, it will happen, it is happening. So I cannot emphasize the urgency of this, not only from the Ukraine side, but also from what we are seeing in other parts of the world. I also keep on saying on acute hunger that because of this crisis, other crises have not stopped. What we are seeing in East Africa, with what we are seeing in the Somali region, whether in Ethiopia or in Somalia, frankly reminds me of 2011 famine conditions in Somalia, where, just as a reminder, before the famine was declared, half of the 260,000 people who died, or half of those 260,000 people who died before the famine was declared. This is all happening as we speak. So the urgency is there in terms of dealing with the conflict, but also dealing with its consequences. We, as World Food Program, as you know, our plan is to assist 145 million people. But you know, the irony is that from 2020, we have been establishing records. In 2020, we reached 115 million people, which was a record in our 60-year history. In 2021, we reached 128 million people. Again, obviously a record, and now 145 million and counting. So the last thing I want to say on this part is the one thing which is very clear is there is absolute consensus between analysts on this. Whether you talk to World Bank, whether you talk to IMF, whether you talk to WTO, whether you talk to FAO, whether you talk to us, we are speaking with the same voice on the problem statement. So our analysis is the same. Just putting one other word in there, there was a joint press release by WTO, IMF, World Bank, and ourselves as a World Food Program. And there is a striking statistic in there, which essentially says that 1% increase in food prices leads to 10 million more people in extreme poverty. So this is happening right now. Now a little bit on what we are doing in Ukraine. We are essentially assisting. Right now, we have reached about 2.5, upwards of 2.5 million people with both food assistance and cash assistance. Our target is to get to upwards of, or up to 6 million people by June. Our requirements up to June are $590 million. As we speak, we have a funding shortfall, or net funding shortfall of about $360 million. In terms of what we are doing and what we are buying, we have upwards of 100,000 metric tons of food in pipeline. 40% of that is actually procured in Ukraine. And that's an also very important point. There is not, inside Ukraine, there is no shortage of food. It is the movement of food, which is a problem. And it is the movement of food within the country, which is happening. But it is the movement of that food outside of country, which is a very big problem. And the other markets are unable to adjust to that, particularly in the near term. So in terms of access, basically back to economic access, it is higher. Why? Because of higher freight values, higher freight costs, and higher cost in time of shipping from someplace else. This is what we are also seeing for ourselves in terms of our own procurement. I think I can stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Arif, for providing this update of what is happening inside Ukraine, but more broadly on the impact that is happening. You mentioned the shipping prices and the problems even to ship, and you mentioned the 3 Fs, and you made a very specific mention to the need of and the reality of talking with the same voice within the international community and the international system. So it is my pleasure now to give the floor in this same, following this same line and this same voice. If Maximo is not yet here, I can't see him here yet.
I'm here.
Sorry, you're here, Maximo. So Maximo, please go ahead and take the floor for your update and your brief for 7 minutes, if possible. Thank you. Over to you, Maximo.
Hey, thank you so much, and apologies, I was a little bit late. So let me continue based on what Arif has already said. As you well know, when we met last time, I explained that FAO is looking at the situation that we are facing today based on 3 groups of risks. The first is the humanitarian risk, of course, which Arif have elaborated, which looks at the food production inside Ukraine, looks at the effects over the refugees and there's more than 7 million people being displaced of Ukraine, but also looks at emergency situation in countries which are being affected by increases in prices, which right now are substantial, especially in regions in South Asia, Latin America, and in some of the coastal parts of North Africa, but not in the center of Africa yet. And that's something that we can elaborate closely. The second component of our assessment of risk is on food and agricultural issues. And here is where the most complex part is, and this is consistent to what Arif was saying. The major problem that we're facing right now is not an issue of food availability in the world for 2022, but a potential huge problem for 2023. And that is related to the inputs and the supply of inputs. And it's fertilizers on one side, because as all of you know, Russian Federation with Belarus are the key exporters of fertilizers, of NPK. So Russian Federation is the top exporter of N, the second exporter of K fertilizer, and the third exporter of P fertilizer. That's the NPK combination. Within this context, what is happening today is that there is still significant scarcity of fertilizers, and the prices of fertilizers keep increasing. And what are the dynamics behind here? The dynamics are related to prices of gas, especially for nitrogen fertilizer, because to produce nitrogen fertilizer, you need energy. And the mechanism and the way it is being produced require this. And if there is a stop of supply of gas to Europe, which is an exporter of fertilizers, of course, that will increase the prices even more and will put more stress in the market. The second element is that it's not that we don't have fertilizers. We have fertilizers in the world, but they are not moving out. And there are only very few exceptions on how they are moving out. Luckily, Brazil was able to move fertilizers out of Russian Federation in the last weeks, which allow Brazil to have what they need. But this is not the case to many key producing countries, exporting countries. And it goes not only to cereals, but to wheat and maize and soybeans, but also affects rice. And many key exporting countries of rice production are facing significant challenges. And this is exactly the period where they need fertilizers. And if you may recall, the only commodity which today is doing well in terms of prices and availability is rice. And rice is a very sensitive commodity, not only for Asians of Asia, but it's also a very sensitive commodity to East and West Africa, because they import rice from outside, despite they produce their own, but they like also the rice from outside. So if we are not able to deliver the fertilizers to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, then we will be facing a significant problem. And that will be affecting, of course, the yields for the next harvest. So on the other hand, if we want to secure the production for 2023, Russia Federation is a key importer of seeds and pesticides from the European Union. And that's something that we need to think carefully, because if they don't procure what they need for next planting season, then we will also have a challenge on what Russia is producing. And I am just being very factual and objective because I think it's important that we understand this. So for you to understand the percentages, they import around 58% in terms of pesticides from the European Union, and 68% in terms of seeds from the European Union. So they require those to be able to achieve the production, the regular production that you have. Now, in that context, what are the challenges? So today, isn't it important to understand that of the 30% of cereals that this Russian Federation and Ukraine deliver to the world in exports, a big proportion of it was already delivered, but there is a proportion which is pending to be delivered and which is also there. And it will be ideal if we find mechanisms through which this can be delivered. But we are talking of 8 million metric tons of wheat for Russia Federation and 6 million metric tons for Ukraine of the total they produce. So that you have an idea, Ukraine will produce in total wheat in a year more than 22 million metric tons, and Russia Federation more than 32 million metric tons. So only 8 million and 6 million are pending to be exported. In the case of maize, for Ukraine is 14 million metric tons, a little bit less than a half of what they produce, and for Russia Federation is 2.5 million metric tons. So this year, part of this gap could be closed, but clearly not for next year, because for next year, if we remove completely from the equation Ukraine from what they produce, because if everything is destroyed, all the value chain infrastructure is destroyed, the logistics, the elevators and so on, we have to take out of the equation the capacity of Ukraine to respond for the next planting season. That means we remove from the world more than 23 million metric tons from wheat, and more than close to 27 to 30 million metric tons of maize, which is pretty complicated. The second thing is that Russian Federation and Ukraine are one of the biggest producers of sunflower, which means that we are talking of about 63% of the global exports of sunflower. Now, this has accelerated the increase in prices in oil seeds. As you well know, March was the highest ever level of the FAO Food Price Index historically since it was created in 1990s, but historically it's higher than 1970s, than 2007, 2008, and 2011. And oil seeds was one of the major reasons of that, and next was the cereals. The problem and the challenge, which is another of the risks we're looking, is trade. And specifically in the case of oilseed, Indonesia decided last week to put an export restriction on palm oil. And it's a key exporter of palm oil. And that is going to exacerbate even more the situation. There were a lot of discussions with the ministries to try to avoid that to happen, but apparently they have confirmed yesterday that this is going to move forward. And that is extremely risky for all what refers to oilseeds and can put a lot more pressure. So we need to figure out ways in which we can minimize those potential risks, because at the end of the line, in the current situation, this is extremely dangerous for the world, but even for the same country, because it will be very difficult to store the amount of palm oil being produced. So we need to find a solution for avoiding those type of export restrictions, especially in key exporting countries of any of these commodities. Now, the concern is that if we add to this the problem of logistics, of the cost of transportation that will keep increasing, not only because of the increase in fuel, but also because of the risk and therefore the insurance that goes attached to that, that means that we are running into a significant risk. No matter even if we can move fertilizers out of Russian Federation, the cost will be higher and the accessibility will be lower, which means that farmers will have less capacity to purchase despite of the increasing prices. This could mean that we are really putting at risk our production for next season, which if you take into account the amount that could be disappearing from Ukraine, plus the amount that could be significantly reduced from Russian Federation, plus the lower yields in the world production of the key exporting countries because of the lower use of fertilizers, that could really put us in a very serious situation in 2023. And that's what we need to avoid. What are the solutions that we need to push? We need to find a way to find a solution to move fertilizers out of Russian Federation. There is no question about it. This is a global problem, and we need to find a solution for that. Fertilizers and pesticides are not part of the sanctions from the US, not part of the sanctions from the European Union. So it's just an issue to find a solution logistically to move that so that we can minimize as soon as possible the potential risk in the world of having a problem in the next planting season. Second, in the case of the drastic situation of countries, the most vulnerable countries, which have seen a significant increase in their import bill of food, not of pesticides, not of fertilizers, not of cereals, but of food in general, when they have seen a significant increase in their import bill and they don't have the capacity to cover that import bill because they are completely indebted and they are putting at risk potential social unrest and they are putting at risk the food security and moving into a significant crisis, we need to provide partial support to them. And that's why FAO is proposing the Global Food Import Financing Facility, which is a very transparent mechanism. It's just based on a simple dimension, which is looking at the change in the import bill for food. And we can cover that. Just to give you an idea, to cover the import facility just for Africa, we are talking, if we cover 100% of $9 billion, if we are covering 10%, $0.9 billion. The number is very small and could resolve a significant problem until we have a structural solution to the conflict we are doing. It's also essential that we find alternative solutions as quickly as possible for the fertilizer problem, while it is resolved the deployment of fertilizers out of Russian Federation. And for that, we need to quickly accelerate the process of soil maps and support to use proper blending so that countries can save on that. But for that, we need to understand where the fertilizers are in the world, where they are available, what combinations are there, and what are the demands and the needs. And we are doing the exercise right now together with a group of David Navarro to try to assess on our side what is the potential demand in the world which is pending. So what is the gap on the imports of fertilizers right now so that we can figure out which are the priority countries that need immediate support to avoid any potential problem at this point. So, dear Chair, I don't want to go more in detail with other, of course, we are looking at better targeting of where the new hotspots of food insecurity. We are requesting resources to do it in 50 countries so that we can have real-time assessment at the subnational level. And we believe it's important to increase efficiency in how we target the social protection programs given the situation we are facing, especially in the most vulnerable countries. So let me stop there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Muchas gracias, Maximo. As always, you described what is a very worrisome scenario and prospects. It reminded me to an earthquake and to a waves and a tsunami, where sometimes the second wave is far worse and far more destructive than the first one, being, of course, the first one, what we're seeing now through food prices spikes and volatility. And maybe, and we need to do our best to prevent that next year, the second wave in the form of a massive multifactorial confluence of situations or factors that may lead to a truly systemic and worldwide shock. You mentioned the prices, of course, of movement of fertilizers as a key, and energy prices as well, and the impact through other non-expected crops such as rice as one of the keys to prevent this as well. So thank you, Maximo, once again, as always, for being here today. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to David Navarro. Arif previously spoke, Maximo, about speaking with the same voice. You were already, Maximo, mentioning some of the policy responses that FAO is proposing. Talking about speaking about with the same voice and providing coherent policy responses, it is very important, critically important, that the UN system works together in the analysis and on the development and sharing of these possible policy responses. I understand that this is what the Secretary General wants, David, with the Global Crisis Response Group, and also facing the multi-related issues between food, energy, and financing. You also refer to that, Maximo. So, David, the floor is yours now. I would be delighted if you can brief us on the Global Crisis Response Group configuration and the advances on your work. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, Chair. Lovely to be with you. And also greetings to everybody who's here. Clearly people with whom I've been able to work before, and it's lovely to be with you at this meeting, though I appreciate the circumstances are not so good, but at least I wanted to acknowledge my absolute pleasure at being in this format. I'm going to start by talking about the UN Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group. I'm then going to give you a brief summary of what was in the first brief that was produced by this group and released by the Secretary General on the 14th of April. And then I'm going to finish with a summary of what's happening within the food work stream and where our work is likely to go. I appreciate I have 6 minutes left, and so this will require me to be quite high level, and I will obviously be delighted to follow up. And if anybody wishes to get further information, please contact me through the CFS Secretariat. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced the formation of a global crisis response group on food, energy and finance on the 14th of March this year. And the purpose is to investigate and then coordinate possible global responses to the worldwide impacts of disturbances in food, energy and finance systems as a result of the crisis currently underway in the Black Sea region. The focus is on reducing threats to peoples, to places and to nations, while at the same time helping to maintain the focus on transformation towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. At the apex of this group is the Secretary General himself, who has made it clear that he sees it as an essential role for him to act on behalf of the people in the world's poorer nations who are at risk of suffering as a result of this conflict, and who really have very few people working on their behalf. The Secretary General believes that it's he who has to stand up for the people who are being affected by this process. And he is also aware, as we heard just now, that the impacts are feeding through now. This is not something that's happening in the future, it's with us. In order to enable him to do this, he's asked this crisis response group to equip him with information for major events. And so the brief was actually very much produced in time for the spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF. But the Secretary General subsequently has travelled to Russia and now to Ukraine, and has also asked for briefs to help him with these journeys, and he's asked for briefs to prepare him for his forthcoming visit to Africa. He's giving this the highest possible attention. In order to help him, he has established a champions group with 6 world leaders: the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister of Denmark, the Chancellor of Germany, President of Indonesia, and the President of Senegal. To support the Global Crisis Response Group, a steering committee with 32 members from across the UN system, including the Bretton Woods institutions, including the multilateral development banks, and including the World Trade Organization, has been set up. This is chaired by the Deputy Secretary General. And to provide the inputs to this group, there is a task team made up of 3 work streams, one on food, one on energy, and one on finance. I want to stress that this is a global crisis response group set up by the Secretary General using resources within the UN Secretariat. That has enabled him to nominate Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, as the coordinator of this task team. In the task team as well are 2 leads for the energy work stream, Damiola Ogunbiyi of Sustainable Energy for All, and Rachel Kite, the former leader of SE for All. Alongside Rebecca Greenspan on finance is Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. And on food is Inga Anderson, the Executive Director of UN Environment Programme, and myself. Now, the work of the task team is organised in cycles. There is meetings each week in order to keep up to date on what is happening, and there's the delivery of a product each month to the Secretary General. The first product delivered on the 13th of April looked at the exposure of different countries around the world to this multiple crisis. 107 economies are exposed to at least one dimension of the crisis. 69 economies are exposed to all 3 dimensions of the crisis. And these 69 economies are home to 1.2 billion people. 40 of these economies are SIDS, and in fact, the small island development states are very highly exposed. 35 of these highly exposed economies are in the least developed country group. I want to stress that in the first brief, the point that was made to the Secretary General was that these are interlocking systems disturbances, and that it's necessary to consider things at 2 levels. First of all, which are the countries that are most exposed and which need the most help? And there it's issues like indebtedness and balance of payments and fiscal headroom that become terribly important. And these were dominant in the discussions during the spring meetings last weekend. But there's another dimension to the work, and that is to identify people and places that are threatened. Because indeed, there may be people threatened by the impacts of this triple crisis who are not necessarily in a country that is identified as having high structural vulnerability, but still, the people themselves may be at risk of reduced food intake, hunger and malnutrition. And that therefore needs attention, even if the country itself is in a satisfactory position economically. And finally, in the food work stream, actually building on what the previous speakers have all said, we have done the following. Firstly, focused on inter-agency coordination and coherence with all the major entities that have an interest in food across the UN system and Bretton Woods institutions in an interagency working group, establishing criteria for indicators and for tracking vulnerability, identifying the countries with greatest risk, and then identifying peoples and developing policy recommendations that were in the first brief that I referred to. In addition, there's a food workstream network, which is a multi-stakeholder structure, totally informal, designed to enable groups who've got contacts around the world to input information they've got about who is in danger, where they're in danger, what they need, what's being done about it, and whether there is a need for coordination. We have been indicating to the CFS chair that the UN Secretary General would appreciate it if the CFS mechanisms wish to be part of this network. They are most welcome to join, and indeed already the high-level panel of experts and the private sector mechanism have joined network meetings. In addition, there is a fertilizer working group, and one of the coordinators of this fertilizer working group, which is designed to help tackle some of the really difficult issues around fertilizer in different countries and regions around the world. One of the coordinators is here and is ready to brief. And so I'd like to stop at this point and just say, I hope that if anybody wants any information about this group, come and do talk to us quickly. And we really are a working entity, global crisis response group, but focused on working. And we are here as a service to people, to nations, and to indeed the Committee on World Food Security. So please do be in touch and indicate issues of concern or interest. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David. And I know that you have time constraints and you have to leave soon the meeting. So before giving you some comments, I would like to go straight to give the floor briefly for a couple of minutes, maybe Arne Cartridge, for briefing a bit on the work that is starting on the fertilizer side on the Global Crisis Response Group. So I'm delighted to see you here, Arne. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, David. And Maximo and Arif has already, I think, to a quite a strong degree, covered some of the challenges that we are faced with. So the fertilizer working group have kind of identified two key streams that we will be diving into as we speak. One is what I would call a heat map, or this whole supply demand, to really understand what are the challenges, and to look at that both across different cropping systems and also different farming groups. The other one will be more on what are alternatives or ways of efficiency. So how can we improve the nitrogen use efficiency? What are ways of improving the use of organic? or other ways of diversification. We also know that, you know, certain crops might not need as much nutrients per year. So if you skip one season, that might have less impact, etc. So those will be the two kind of focal or focus areas. On the kind of the supply demand side, we all know that the markets are tight, and also not fully understanding, you know, what product could come out of Russia. So yes, you know, fertilizers such as not part of the sanctions, but given that the oligarchs who owns or controls most of these companies are, and shipping companies, insurance companies, other, you know, actors are very careful of taking products. But we have already seen that, for example, India is buying some products, Brazil is buying some products, so we'll understand that better. There's also other companies or countries where there are export restrictions. You know, there is capacity in China, that product is not coming into the market. So there are some of these kind of disconnected trade flows that we need to understand. But as Maximo said, you know, there is product available in the global context, but can we get that product at an affordable level to the farmers in the right time? And I think also, as Maximo highlighted, you know, for many commodities, you know, wheat, sunflower, corn, soy, the prices provides an incentive, and farmers can actually recover some of the high cost of fertilizer by high value of the crops they produce. That is not the case on rice. As Maximo said, you know, so there are deep concerns also, I think, on are we able to actually provide the necessary fertilizer and to get the necessary yields for the rice production. Anyway, I think that, and what we will be looking at is 3 time horizons. One, here and now, so what is kind of the next 3 to 4 months? And we have some emergency. Bangladesh has been mentioned. We have West Africa and other places. Then it's more than 9 months, you know, those are the coming seasons in key growing areas, and then more of an 18 months time horizon. So we will get back to you very shortly with better data and structuring that in analysis, and then providing some of the guidance that we believe is required. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Arne, and I'm delighted that the World Business Council on Sustainable Development is also so committed to provide solutions from the private sector's side, working together with other stakeholders and the UN in this key challenge, where solutions need to involve necessarily all the dimensions, politically, logistically, from the business, from the civil society, community, etc. So thank you very much. And David, thank you so much for being here today. Indeed, the Deputy Secretary General extended an invitation to the CFS from the outset through its chair to participate and be engaged with the Global Crisis Response Group. I'm delighted that the HLPE, the PSN and the CSM has been invited, and that so far you are already receiving very, I hope, very valuable, and I'm convinced, very valuable inputs and perspectives from those that are already engaging. Additionally, we have also the Secretariat joining your working group and the rest of the staff of the UN to ensure as much as possible that we work coordinately with the UN family, with being part also with this interagency coordination work, and making the bridge with the intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder space of the Committee on World Food Security. David, I have already reassured the DSG and that the CFS is fully ready and will serve its function as an intergovernmental committee and in support of all your efforts.
Thank you.
So now I'm thanking once again Maximo, Arif, David, Arne for this brief, and I'm delighted to see the convergence between messages and the intense interagency work with the whole of the UN family, plus the rest of the international organizations at this point. I strongly believe that it is very valuable that we listen very carefully to your analysis, to the granularity that is increasingly being provided by FAO, WFP, and the rest of the UN system and the Global Crisis Response Group, and the emphasis on people, and that on the accent you posed, David, on the fact that it is not just countries, it is people within countries, and it's ultimately people which resonates with our mandate on the right to food as a human right, and that the need to consider this as an interlocking systems disturbance, you said, David. So thank you. Sorry, I got a mute. Now I will go to the next round of speakers, and I would very much like to invite to provide this first round of briefings on what is happening at the international level to the Special Rapporteur on the right to food, to Michael Fakhri. Michael, you were invited together with Maximo to the area meeting of the Security Council under the leadership of Ireland. So I would very much like to you to provide us with a brief on what happened and on your specific intervention. Maybe Michael, in view of the time constraints, if you have 3-4 minutes intervention, it would be great. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. I'm a little flustered today because this meeting started at 5 in the morning my time, so I'm a little slower than usual. So as Gabriel mentioned, I was invited with WFP, with FAO, and an NGO to brief the Security Council a week ago on the issue of conflict and hunger. What I'll do is explain what my remarks were, what impressions I have from that meeting, and bring forward some ideas of maybe what the conversation could be at the CFS. You were all very well briefed today. I want to commend everyone's work that we've heard today. What's interesting to me, especially with this group here, with the CFS, is why this degree of response now? For over 2 years, at the CFS, we've heard this time and time and time again. Many of us have been calling for immediate action and response to the global food crisis that started before the pandemic, that was made worse because of the pandemic. We've seen conflicts arising more and more everywhere around the world in the last several years. We've seen the risk of famine increase around the world over the years. Why now? Why is it now? And that's part of the discussion that was had at the Security Council and what I posed to the Security Council. My intuition, my sense is what's at stake now is not, of course, it is incredibly bad today, more than it ever has. And it is going to get worse, I suspect, from what we've heard today. But my sense is that this is a moment where it's not just about a food crisis. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to get people to mobilize. But what's at stake is international institutions' legitimacy and government's ability to maintain security. That's, I think, what is also threatened. And so what I told the Security Council is that everyone has failed. Every UN agency, every regional body, every government has failed. Governments and international institutions have failed to listen to the most vulnerable communities and to respond to their demands. Governments and international institutions have failed to cooperate and coordinate. This is why we are here today the way we are. These were the comments I made to the Security Council, and I bring them forward to you. What's interesting to me then is that, again, this isn't the only conflict. Why is it this particular conflict that has raised these issues? One argument that was made at the Security Council was that an attack against Ukraine is an attack against the world food system. I advised against this line of thinking, because what that tells people is if you're not a country that exports, then you don't matter. And that's not true. I think everyone here understands that a war or an armed conflict in any country disrupts the global food system because we're all interconnected. That's what we've learned from the pandemic. So here's the dynamic that I saw at the Security Council, and here's sort of how I suggested things can move forward. I'll just take 1 more minute, Chair, if you don't mind. There was it split geopolitically around the war in Ukraine. There were the Western powers, I'll just call them that, where they kept emphasizing that the war in Ukraine is the ultimate cause of the food crisis. And then Russia and its allies kept emphasizing that the problem is embargoes, unilateral and unilateral coercive measures. This is what has disrupted the food system. And my response to both is, you're both correct, factually speaking. Both of those dynamics have disrupted the food system, but their analysis falls short because it's not from a food system perspective. I focused on markets, and what it shows is the failure of markets to absorb shocks, and markets are amplifying shocks is what we're seeing. So ultimately, the problem is one of global governance, and our institutions are not responding appropriately. So interestingly, even though the Security Council is one of the most powerful organs, its focus, because it's on peace and security, unfortunately is limited. Whereas a place like the CFS has the broad focus, a food systems perspective that the world needs. So this is what I recommended to the Security Council, and I'll bring it forward here, is what we're not seeing is political will. So we're seeing all of this energy, but we need clarity and we need coordinated action. And we're missing political will for a coordinated response to the crisis. Now, I hope it comes out of the CFS, but my job is to make sure something happens somewhere. That's part of my job. So it could be through ECOSOC, it could be through the General Assembly. The world needs a clear political statement that both reaffirms government's commitment to the right to food and provides an institutional map that activates, guides, and coordinates all international institutions around the right to food. I'll end there, and I welcome any questions or comments afterwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Michael, for providing your a brief on the meeting and on your point as the independent special rapporteur of the right to food, reminding that it is indeed about people and about what means to the fundamental right to food, to this conflict amongst other, this war amongst other, or on top of other crises, existing crises. Thank you, Michael, once again. Now, and before opening the floor to the discussion, I would like to invite the chair or the vice chair, if you're here, Bernard or Jennifer, of the high-level panel of experts to take the floor. Bernard, Jennifer, as the chair and co-chair of the high-level panel of experts, thank you very much indeed. You provided a briefing note for this meeting today, which has helped me on my reflections indeed, and I believe that will have been also very for other participants. So thank you for your input, Bernard and Jennifer, in the name of the whole of the high-level panel of experts. So I'd like you to take the floor, if you wish, for maybe 3 to 5 minutes to provide your views as the high-level panel of experts to our discussion today. So Bernard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I will just make a start with setting the scene of our meeting here in Rome this week, and Jennifer will go further on this special note we have formulated on the crisis of Ukraine. The work stream we have is the work stream with reports mandated by the CFS. In the year 2022, we have also the possibility to formulate the note of critical, emerging and enduring issues for the CFS. This is a good situation because we can also take in account the current situation which has been described by all the experts, and like price increase and all the problems we have with the situation of Ukraine. And especially this spring, we elaborated a note on the crisis in Ukraine about the consequences for the food system and nutrition, and also we formulated recommendations. And Jennifer will this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Chair. Rather than go through the whole details of the briefing note that we have prepared, I'll just quickly reiterate, because others have already briefed the meeting on the extent to which the military conflict has affected the global food system, not just with the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, but also the disruption to trade, higher and volatile food prices, and the fact that this is just the latest of several crises, as David Navarro pointed out, the interlocking nature. And so the emphasis of our brief is really on the need for policy coordination at the international level. And this is where CFS, as Michael Fakhri just said, can really play an important role. We need coordination with respect to international food trade, because we need to rebuild trust in food markets. We need coordination with respect to long-term versus short-term policy responses to ensure that there is coherence. And we need a holistic response because of the interlocking nature with other crises. And so we just wanted to make clear in the brief that the HLPE is ready to help advise the CFS as necessary to help develop potentially a policy product such as a framework for action on global food crises that could map out the kinds of actions necessary when these kinds of disruptions happen, because we've seen increasingly frequent crises in the global food system, often including rampant food price increases that require urgent policy responses. And there are things that we know that are useful pieces of advice, yet we keep reanalyzing and coming up with the same thing. So we're thinking that this could be very useful to bring together that kind of policy advice, especially around things like export restrictions, which we know are problematic for making markets even more volatile. Advice around things such as strategic grain reserves, which many people are discussing right now. Advice around emergency humanitarian responses, for example, and also the need to remind us that this all has to take place within the context of ensuring transformation of food systems and long-term food system resilience. So I'll stop there, but just to let the participants in the meeting know that the HLPE is obviously thinking about considering these issues and is ready to advise the CFS as requested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard, Jennifer, and I see the whole room here in FAO on the screen with the whole of the high-level panel of experts members, and I extend this thanks, as I said, to all the membership. It is very generous that you are offering, and you are so committed as a high-level panel of experts group to supporting the work of the CFS in different ways. When I was reading your briefing note, I underlined and highlighted some of the issues you say here, and you're contributing and adding your voice to stating clearly that coordinating policy responses is essential, and that this coordinated approach helps to ensure an holistic response. And you also point out that to the longer term responses to the crisis that require, and I quote, governments to harmonize strategies to build more resilient food systems, including those that prioritize diversity. And you conclude in your paper saying that the CFS can play a lead role in this policy coordination response, or coordinating the policy responses to the current crisis. So you see, I appreciate that you see also a role for the CFS in some way to play this role. Thank you once again, Jennifer and Bernard. So before going to the second part of this substantive segment, I would like to give the floor to some or to one at least, of our eminent participants here today in our meeting, starting with Gerda. Gerda Verburg, we all know you, and you are not just the ASG in the United Nations and coordinator of Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, but you have been one of my predecessors as the chair of this Committee on World Food Security. You know better than I do the potentials about the committee to respond in these kinds of crises. And of course, you are very much on top of what is happening on the nutrition side of the situation now, and of the impact of the war and all the factors that are influencing on nutrition. So Gerda, I'm delighted that you are here. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And indeed, the CFS has still a warm place in my heart, and I'm always happy to be there and to see so many familiar faces. Gabriel, I don't want to, I can only emphasize what has been said by others already right now, but I am now the coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, a movement of 65 member countries who have committed, where the government has committed to improve nutrition. Now, this is broader than nutrition and more than nutrition. But this morning I arrived back from a visit in Mali. And this has brought me to taking the floor also in the CFS, because for all of us, wherever we are, we can lead from where we are. whether we are in a task force or in the high-level panel of experts, we don't need to lean back, but we all are representing a group or a country. And what is so urgent right now is that in the country, in the humanitarian packages, there is not only the focus on providing food, but the provision of providing of social protection for people and the delivering of nutritious food. Because many of the poor people who are the first victims of hunger and malnutrition are very poor, and very often they don't have the opportunity to cope with the rising prices. And this is not the first crisis for them. So what we otherwise will see is that we will build up the humanitarian need and more, and people and families are not able to create resilience. Only with social protection and nutritious food provision, you will be able to also build the resilience and keep or create the social cohesion. So please make a strong plea to your government to make sure that the provided food is not only filling the belly, but it's really serving the children and the families. Otherwise, you create a stunted economy for the next decades. My second point, and I have 3 points, Mr. Chair. My second point is on the governments who are understandable now investing in buying food to provide food to their societies. In some countries, in Mali, for instance, the government is now investing 15% of their national budget, whereas they in general invest only less than 1% in agriculture and food production in their own country. And I think all of us need to make the case that instead of investing in importing food that very often is heavily subsidized, government need in a parallel to also invest in making it possible for the farmers and the players along the whole food value chain to be competitive and to be able to produce against reasonable prices, because these farmers and these entrepreneurs and all these people working along the food value chain are very much motivated to find the alternatives, to deliver the fortified food, to keep the nutrition in, but they need to get the opportunity to not be in competition with heavily subsidized imported food. And this is more needed than ever, and it can be done immediately. My final point is focusing on the next harvest, because the focus also needs to be on the next harvest. My strong plea would be, let all the countries that are participating in this important CFS event, but also the different mechanisms, let them in their own country make a plea to bring on the shortest notice the participants of the food systems dialogues around the table. And let them discuss as different sectors and different stakeholders what can be done to invest in alternatives for all the important food. How the country can become, as soon as possible, independent of so many import, because it's devastating. If you see the number, Cameroon, Nigeria, Kenya, it is 30 or 40% of the food crops are important. But how can you speed up the transformation of your own food systems, continuing to focus on nutritious food production, diversification, but also do it in a sustainable way, and think about speeding up, building the food value chain, so that you can also create prosperous jobs for your young people. So with these 3 things, Mr. Chair, I would offer our collaboration. We are more than happy then to work hand in hand with the CFS in the 65 member countries where the Sun movement is active. And it is desperately needed. I've said it before, but let us make it happen right now. Thank you for the good and hard work of each and all of you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gerda. And And thanks also for the invitation that we very warmly welcome to work together with you and your network and your movement to make this happen in these days. And thank you. You mentioned very clearly the nutritional outcome of the need not to just feed but also nourish in this situation, and the very important idea of considering how local supply, and that which is usually has less environmental footprint sometimes, and is more nutritious in many ways, but also supports farmers and to mitigate the impact on poverty at the local level, may be also part of the very important part of the solution in now and in the medium and long term. So thank you very much always, Gerda, for being here. I hope that you can join us in this format of joint bureau and advisory group meetings, substantive segments, also in the coming meetings.
As much as I can.
Thank you so much once again. So now I will try to like to go now. It's 3:15 almost. I was expecting actually to have this first substantive segment almost for 2 hours, so we have 45 minutes now, and I would like, before opening the floor to the discussion, to introduce a bit the second part of the other side of the coin of this discussion, which is what should and what can we do as Committee on World Food Security. You have heard me consistently saying in the last weeks and months, and I expressed this to the letter I sent you in advance of this meeting, that I strongly believe that the CFS, as an intergovernmental committee, must respond in this crucial and challenging moment. I really sense that it is my duty as chairperson of the committee to strive to make our space, our platform, serve as the place in which our governments, but also the other stakeholders, all the stakeholders and the United Nations system, which is basically our constituency, where we meet, where we share, where we discuss, and where we coordinate the needed policy responses. This is what we're doing today. And this is what we started to do during our last meeting. So in very close coordination with the international community, no doubt, and very especially with FAO, with WFP and IFAD, and with the UN Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group, I truly believe that the CFS must take action and must take up its responsibility in the next weeks and months, and fully serve our mandate with the tools we have at our disposal. So we need a very clear, we have a very clear mandate to provide policy coordination for food security and nutrition in support to country-led policies. This is what is spelled out in our reform document. The tools we have for our use are different forms of convening and of meeting first. We can do this in the format we are doing this today, which is the joint bureau and advisory group meetings. We also may consider to convene a special intersessional event, as we have done in the past, in the format maybe of a high-level meeting in the coming months. Or we could even, as part of our tools, convene an extraordinary plenary to address and to focus on this policy coordination. So there are different options. Of course, we have the high-level panel of experts, which is one of our most important tools as well. Different options that we may consider to use to make the what I believe is our full responsibility in this situation. So I now open the floor, moving to the analysis, to the policy responses that are emerging that we heard from the speakers before, and moving also into what can we do tomorrow at the Bureau meeting, of course, and after listening very carefully to this discussion, we will be addressing by the Bureau members and alternates what we will be doing in the next or the coming weeks and months. So now the floor is open. I would very much like to deliberate on this and listen very, very carefully to your views. So now, colleagues, the floor is open. And I now see first request from the floor, I think it's from the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. I think it's Tyler, if I am reading well on my screen, the floor. Yes, it's you. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chair. Speaking on behalf of the civil society and the Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, which we now have adopted the acronym CSIPM, and request everyone to work with us on this new acronym. We're going to comment briefly on the analysis portion. And so we really thank the HLPE for this note. And our analysis in the CSIPM, there's a lot of, we coincide on a lot of different aspects, largely with regard to the terrible effects of the war on Ukrainian people and the region, how the global food crisis is building upon previous layers of crises, the effects continuing of the pandemic, which really reveal deep structural inequalities, as well as the systemic failures of global value chains, failures of international trade rules, the climate crises, and many other conflicts and protracted crises. So clearly, as we've discussed already, we're facing many intersecting crises. So we do believe that the HLPE, recognizing the vulnerability of global food systems, just a few exporting countries, and the enormous risks of high food import dependency of low and middle income countries. This recognition is crucial, particularly with regard to understanding food price speculation. And so we want to note just a couple areas that could have perhaps been strengthened in the note. Largely that the new layer of crises with the war we're seeing, as we've discussed today, there are major elements that are a distribution crisis, as well as some elements of a production crisis. So we have to really take into account the impacts of the financial crises for indebted food importing countries. And we really have to keep in mind the dire need to cancel external debts that many global South countries have been facing. And so by recognizing the important, the role of debt and financial constraints with regard to growing hunger, we should also be aware of market grabbing, in which some agro-exporting countries would like to take advantage of the current crisis and take over the export markets of Ukraine and Russia. And then finally, Chair, we would like to just make some questions and comments on the way ahead. The HLPE and Special Rapporteur have noted a couple short-term as well as medium and long-term steps. So we would like to pose a question to the Special Rapporteur as well as the HLPE on how we can achieve coherence between the immediate response as well as building a new, diversified, resilient, equitable food system. So the coherence between the short term and the medium term. For the CSIPM, it's absolutely crucial that we focus very strongly on a moratorium on biofuels, that we monitor strongly current commodity markets and speculation in those markets. We need to emphasize financial support to low-income food deficit countries and recognize the importance of social protection policies. And then, Chair, we really must emphasize the need to build food sovereignty in our countries and in our territories. And this fundamentally involves diversifying local production, strengthening the agency of small-scale food producers, supporting territorial markets and scaling agroecology, peasant agroecology, as well as decreasing dependency on synthetic fertilizers and agrotoxins. And finally, Chair, in conclusion, we would like to just say that our mechanism is initiating popular consultations currently on the overlapping crises. And we look forward to contributing the results of these consultations with you all. So we would like to again raise our questions to the Special Rapporteur and the HLPE on the coherence between the short term, medium term, and long term. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Tyler, and civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. I truly appreciate your very constructive contributions and your very constructive approach and the way in which you're mobilizing also your networks and your communities at the local and at the community level to analyze what is happening, how is being suffered, the impact of this war and the existing crises. And well, I very much value also that you referred to the coherence between the short, medium, and long-term responses, and the need to, as Michael Fakhri was saying, to keep a very close eye on the long term and on the food system transformation, if we could put it in the Secretary General's Food System Summit language, while we address the short-term measures of this crisis. Thank you, Tyler. You referred also to issues related to land, to responsible land governance, to social protection, to biofuels, to agency of small-scale producers or smallholder farmers, to reducing dependencies and increasing the use of or the extension of agroecology. All these are part of the agreements that has been achieved within the committee in the last years. I was reflecting that maybe during the last 10 years, the Committee on Food Security has been agreeing on critical issues that affect or that emerge very strongly in the times of crisis. And you mentioned several of those, that we have already a stock of agreed policy recommendations, of agreed guidelines, voluntary of course, but we have agreed on that. And this is probably an extremely useful, valuable stock of agreements that we may make use today in response of this crisis. Thank you, Tyler, once again. I'm sorry, colleagues, for extending a bit on my comments. Now I see three requests from the floor, and I'm sorry because I didn't. Oh yes, it's IFAD first. IFAD, please, the floor is yours, followed by Brian Baldwin from the Private Sector Mechanism and Marcella from WHO. Floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And I also want to thank my previous speakers to give us the briefings on what's happening on the ground and their analysis on the impact of this Ukraine crisis. As many speakers has already said, that even before the Ukraine crisis, that the smallholder farmers were struggling to cope with shocks from climate changes and from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we see yet another shock to their livelihoods and the food security. The poorest of the developing countries, the most vulnerable of the poor countries are hardest hit disproportionately. So we all know that the world's poorest rural population aren't able to absorb such hikes in food, in fertilizers, in the energy prices. All those burdens falls hardest on the smallholder farmers, on women, on youth, and on marginalized groups in rural areas. But we must think about resilience and the longer term and the structural changes that will transform our food systems sustainably. And while the impact of the Ukraine war unfold, we have to act with this perspectives in mind. We need immediate response, but we also need actions to lead to longer term resistance. Actions that makes smallholder farmers themselves agents of a longer term response and creating structural changes to food systems for the better. So IFAD, I'm talking about IFAD is approaching the current crisis in this manner, and we're focusing on what need fixing, and where we see the most critical gaps to longer term resistance. So we identified 4 areas. One is we need to increase in local productions and processing. And second is to encourage consumption of local production. Third is to develop domestic markets and the integration of regional markets. And the fourth is to reducing the production of, reducing the food losses and waste. So we are also working in the immediate term on measures to ensure that small-scale farmers have access to inputs such as fertilizer, seeds, financing to buy foods, and also storage facilities and digital information on price and markets and other things. We also have just launched a new initiative called Crisis Response Initiative to scale up our support in these areas, but not at cost of longer term resistance. And this initiative is to protect productivity by addressing the urgent needs caused by the current crisis. Also, while at the same time tapping into new market opportunities for smallholder farmers and also to support sustainable food systems. So that's for EFA's responses. And on the role of CFS, we think that the CFS is an essential platform in the current context and has a key role to play in providing essential guidance on addressing both the immediate and the longer term aspects of the crisis, and in bringing stakeholders together to consolidate and strengthen coordinated policy responses to both current crisis and future crisis. And we also think that the HLPE is a good tool and asset to give policy advices. So we also thank the HLPs for the informative information note, briefing note on the impact of Ukraine war and also the short, medium, and longer term recommendation, also for the call for coordinated corporate policy responses. We encourage that the XPs or capacities of the HLPEs could be strengthened and more leveraged given its scientific research capacity. I will stop here. Thank you. Chair.
Thank you very much, Wei. And you're building also on and converging with some of the points made by the Sun Movement coordinator and also civil society and other speakers when you were pointing at domestic markets and the integration at the regional level and supporting smallholder farmers, reducing food waste and increasing efficiency also as would be a positive outcome of this crisis. I was wondering and thinking when I was listening to you, Wei, that we need to provide, of course, input for next season and for this season, but which may be even more important is that we need to preserve the rural and farmers' fabric for the medium and longer term. And probably if this crisis results on rural migration or on many farmers being broken, or small and medium enterprises in the rural areas having to leave their business because of the crisis, then this would perpetuate the situation for many years, and we will lead to unsustainability of our societies. So thank you for reminding us on this very important dimension that resonates to the links between the short, medium, and long-term impacts and policies we need to reinforce in response. Thank you, Wei, once again. Brian, private sector mechanism. Please, the floor is yours. It's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, thank you very much for convening today's meeting and the work that's gone into preparing for it. And much appreciate the presentations that we've heard from WFP, FAO, and as well from David and the Global Crisis Response Group. And as we mentioned in chat, and as I would acknowledge now, we've been pleased that he has invited both the CFS and the mechanisms and the HLPE to join that group, and we have taken part in those meetings and contributed into the food workstream network that David was talking about. I also wanted to use today's discussion just to update you on some of the messages that have been going out, to the private sector. We had a presentation today from Maximo on some of the latest information. At the same time today, the FAO convened a consultation with the private sector as it prepares for the FAO's regional conference in Europe. And much appreciation to the FAO for convening that dialogue with the private sector, where, of course, in the European context, many of the issues that we've been discussing today came up. And in the same light that the World Bank, the World Food Programme, and Arif Husain mentioned in terms of his press release that had gone through from the IMF, World Bank, WTO, and FAO, the recommendations that came out from the FAO to the private sector in Europe today at the consultation with regards to the global food security and the conflict in Ukraine were, and I want to repeat them because these are the messages that were going out today. Keep global food and fertilizer trade open. We've heard that today. Find new and more diverse food suppliers. And Gerda in the Sun Movement said, yes, we need that investment to get that diverse food suppliers. We've been talking and rightly so, at length about supporting vulnerable groups, including internally displaced people. We've also been emphasizing today, avoid the ad hoc policy reactions. And then finally, importantly, strengthening market transparency and dialogue. There's a consistency of messages going out. And I think that with the work that's being done now, when we come to the CFS plenary work, this is where we can reiterate this consistency of approach. The messages are going out in terms of the importance of food production, as David Nabarro's team has been emphasizing, the food production, diversifying food resources, reducing food and waste, more assistance to farmers, avoiding ad hoc policy reactions, and finding more diverse food. I just wanted to bring that up to your attention, that consistency of approach, the messages that are going out. And again, thank you to the FAO for convening that meeting in the European context with private sector today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Brian. I will not comment. I have to restrict my own comments now, in the sake of time. But thank you very much to the VSM for your engagement and for your very, very constructive support to this dialogue on coordinating responses and to helping to converge on very, I would say converging, sorry for the reiteration, messages and policy recommendations. Thank you, Brian, once again. Now, Marcela, WHO, now I'll have to restrict a bit the timing. So for 2 minutes, please, Marcela, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I have an extra here. I have a bit connection issue, but I will try. First of all, thank you for the presentations, which we find very important. And also thank you for the HLPE note, which is very relevant. And we appreciate the approach in the HLPE note, which takes a more holistic framing of the situation and also addresses the health needs of such a framing. WHO is deeply concerned about the health situation of the people in Ukraine and the escalating crisis. And UNICEF and the WFP, together with WHO, have called that people need a functioning health system that continues to deliver essential care to people, and also a system that can address all services from COVID-19 needs to non-communicable diseases, especially for the vulnerable people such as older persons and migrants. There is more than 30% of the population in the conflicted areas are older than 60 years. So that is a real issue of concern as well. And more than 5 million refugees have been reported by UNFSS. Sorry. WHO is supporting the health sector in Ukraine and also in the refugee hosting countries, and also coordinating the health partners under as lead of the health cluster. The health emergency appeal that has been released has received 66% of funding until now for Ukraine and the surrounding countries for period until May, and it is essential to receive flexible funding to deliver urgent life-saving assistance where it is most needed. I would like to put the attention also on the malnutrition situation, because there are concerns expressed that the war against Ukraine threatens to increase the number of malnourished people in the world globally, especially women and children, through the threat to food security, but also through that the reach of humanitarian assistance and services for prevention and treatment of acute malnutrition might be affected, and also the risk that that there could be a reallocation of nutrition budgets to other priorities. We very much appreciate your proposal, and we think CFS is the right place for a coordinated global policy response. And we think that a special session or an extraordinary plenary session could be the right way forward. We think that such a session may take a broader systemic approach and also incorporate essential needs of people's nutrition and health. And I also would like to bring in, again, social protection and the whole importance of resilience of food systems at national level. And this could be considered in this approach. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Thank you, WHO, and thanks for reminding us, as Gerda was doing, on the very important impact on nutrition and on the need to not divert or to avoid diverting nutritious funds and food in this situation. Thank you also for your reminder together with Maximo Torero before, on the need of also to consider social protection, very important dimension, together with other speakers. Thank you, Marcela. Now I see, I think it's 3 speakers. I would like to ask Jennifer and Hilal from the HLPE to be very brief, if you are both taking the floor. So maybe a couple of minutes each, as much, and then followed by the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanisms, HALA. Jennifer, Hilal, Jennifer, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. We just wanted to respond to the CSIPM's question just very briefly. And I'm glad you asked this question, because this is the message that we've been consistently bringing forward to the Global Crisis Response Group, is the need to ensure coherence between short-term responses and long-term responses in this particular situation. So while at the same time that emergency response is required in terms of humanitarian assistance, debt relief, etc., it must be accompanied by diversification of food systems, especially in import-dependent countries. That also needs to be done in a way that is sustainable, with climate-resilient methods and the reduction of fossil fuels and synthetic fertilizers, for example. And that diversity is really the key word in terms of that longer term response, diversity of production, of markets, of diets. And that needs to be initiated at the same time. It has to be in view at the same time that we take the shorter term responses. And I just wanted to say that many of the more detailed aspects of how you coordinate these long and short term are being dealt with in our critical and emerging issues note, and Hilal Elver has been leading that process, so I'll pass it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much all. And it's a great pleasure. It came very shortly to the conversation. CSIPM's answer, questions answered shortly by Jennifer. And I would like to also thank you to Special Rapporteur on Right to Food, bringing the right to food conversation to highest level of the United Nations body. I'm very happy that members of the Security Council will take seriously in this very serious time. And I would like to also tell all the members and the CSM, all the partners, that we have this critical, emerging, and enduring issues as of yesterday in the open to e-consultation. And we would like to have your ideas and comments to enrich and come to the conclusion on this very important period. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both Jennifer and Hilal, former Special Rapporteur. So we have today the Special Rapporteur and his predecessor, Hilal. Thanks for your inputs, indeed. So if no further comments, I will go straight to the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. Hala.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will make comments on 2 points. I start with the obvious now need for a globally coordinated policy response and a high-level event, so in the form of the extraordinary plenary of the CFS. So as the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, we welcome and support the proposal of the CFS chair to convene a high-level meeting of the CFS, possibly in the form of the extraordinary plenary session this spring or summer. But as an expression of deep concern and urgency, the CSIPM Coordination Committee had proposed in a letter to the CFS chair on the 6th of April and the extraordinary plenary of the CFS to be convened as soon as possible to address the new global emergency and bring together the views and the demands of all concerned countries, communities, and actors, looking forward to have a globally coordinated policy response. We also would like to comment on a suggestion by the chair that this plenary is going to focus on examining the current global food systems situation. So we agree, of course, with this emphasis, but we also strongly suggest that special space and attention should be given to these countries and populations most affected by the new crisis. I speak also here as an Egyptian, one of the countries that really affected by and we can foresee that we will be more affected in the future by the new crisis. So we would like to see governments from food dependent and low and middle income countries, from countries with high rates of food insecurity, having a leading role in this extraordinary plenary, in sharing their analyses, their proposals, but also hopefully reaching conclusions. The CFS policy coordination function, as underlined by the chair and the HLPE, is essential now. So while we see that some coordination efforts have been made in the context, in other contexts like the G7 and the G20 settings, they cannot really replace the CFS. The CFS is the most inclusive intergovernmental and international platform, where also we, as a multitude of food producing constituency, and the diversity of food system workers, women, youth, indigenous people, consumers, and urban food insecure have space and a voice. If you will permit me, I will also comment on the Global Crisis Response Group, or the participation of the CFS and the CSIPM in it. So the CSIPM received the kind invitation of the chair to join the UN Secretary General Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance. We participate as part of the CFS participation. And then our coordination committee and the respective CSIPM working group, we have held internal consultations about how to respond to this invitation. We would just like to update that the internal consultations are ongoing. The CSIPM coordination committee has agreed to send its response to the CFS chair by the end of the coming week. There are several maybe questions that would help us to come to a decision. We want to hear more about the process and the position of the CFS in this group. We would also like to try to respond to a question about how to ensure that the views from the civil society organization constituencies which are most affected will reach the UNFSS. As clearly the small-scale food producers are currently feeding the world feeding the people in Ukraine, for example, and elsewhere. So they have maybe solutions to present. And we also are a bit concerned about how the crisis group intends to support the work of the CFS currently, and to maybe try to overcome the problems that have been encountered regarding governance so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hala, for your statement. And maybe before providing and reacting to your statement, I would like to give the floor now to Arne. I think this is the last speaker that has requested the floor, and then I will back to some of your comments, Hala. Arne, since you are the last speaker, so please.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriel. And no, just a quick comment. And since many have raised, the question around fertilizer, but also the need and requirement for us to really accelerate the transformation of our global food system. So I just want to emphasize that for the short term, we obviously need to do our utmost to avoid any unnecessary yield gaps in the coming planting season, and thereby avoiding that we get a bigger, stronger kind of food crisis in the coming months or coming year or two. That said, I think what we need to do is that we need to avoid that we strengthen, call it, the old ways of how to either apply fertilizer or how to do some of the farming systems. So we need to find smart ways to how to shift to a more nature positive food future, build in more resilience, because part of the challenge that we are faced with now, even on the fertilizer side, they are very structural and they are systemic challenges that we all known about for quite some time. So it's on us, and I think that's why it's important for us, to both through CFS and other channels to have this open dialogue, and how do we best both kind of put a band-aid, if you like, on the short-term challenges, but do so in a way that can address the transformation that we all know that is required. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arne, and also converging with some of the messages we have been hearing today about transitioning to more equitable and sustainable food systems. Thank you very much indeed. So now, and I would like to give the floor also back to Michael Fakhri. You have been putting very really rich post on the chat. But before doing that, I would like to react to what Hala and the CSIPM, sorry about that, just expressed. Well, first of all, I thank you for your letter very much indeed, and for your reflections that is included in that letter. And I understand this has been shared with the whole Bureau and Advisory Group membership, so they're all aware. Well, I must, on what you suggested, Hala, about putting at the center the voices of those more affected by the impact of this crisis. I've not just noted is that it would be my intention, whatever the decision is taken by the Bureau tomorrow, or the reflection on what the role the CFS will be playing to serve its platform to all the stakeholders and the members of the member states of the UN, etc. This would be the approach I will be fostering, is putting at the center of their concerns those that are more affected, be those smallholder farmers, family farmers, small and medium enterprises, most vulnerable countries, that because they are more dependent on food imports, etc., etc. So you have my commitment. I will be proposing that in this way, for, of course, always for the consideration of the Bureau, and in the form the Bureau may wish to advise or to decide in the ways in which we'll proceed in the coming weeks and months. Finally, and with regards to the Global Crisis Response Group, although David Navarro is not here, so it would have been good if he could reply. But what I would say is, well, first, thank you for your in-depth reflection, as always, taking very seriously this proposal. I am fully convinced, and I have said so to the Deputy Secretary General directly, and of course to David Navarro, that the contribution by the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism of the committee is essential in this network, which is aimed at listening precisely to what is happening at the community, at the local level, to feed into the Secretary General's leadership. And this is very important. And this is not replacing the role of the Committee on World Food Security. And this is what, as I see it, is working together with the Secretary General's efforts through his Global Crisis Response Group. The CFS is what is the rich platform we are part of. It's an intergovernmental committee, and that has the space to include and listen all voices involved, and especially to motivate and to bring the whole of the United Nations system together in the policy responses. So this is what I would say. Hala, I think that this relationship can only be fruitful for all parts, because the challenge is really, really tough, and we need to play our roles within our own spaces and mandates, but working together, as we were saying before at the opening of the meeting. So thank you, as always, Hala, and the mechanism. And now I will like to give the floor back to Michael Fakhri, Special Rapporteur, please. You say in the chat, it's in the interest of time, I will answer briefly here. No, in the interest of substance, please do this using your mic on. The floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. That's very kind and very generous of you. So first, what I want to do is highlight, we've been talking about chemical fertilizers. The issue really, I'll take a step back. I just want to highlight, we've heard a lot of solutions from different actors. A lot of the solutions, many of us from the Right to Food community, from civil society, we've been proposing these solutions, not just for years, for decades. Diversify, increase local, strengthen local markets and regional markets, don't rely always on imports, don't rely on chemical inputs. And now we're hearing the people we've been critiquing, they've adopted these points. So I just want to highlight this more. What's important is this. We have clear answers on how to move forward, how to transform food systems from a right to food perspective, from a human rights perspective more broadly, that incorporates all the complexity. Human rights is a way of analyzing and action. So one, keeping that long-term in mind. Second, there's a lot of existing problems that make it hard. So there is some agreement here, but we have to understand the WTO, for example, the rules at the WTO make it very difficult to do what we want to do here. Even if we all agree on 2-3 points, let's say, it is incredibly difficult for a net importing developing country to increase its local production in a way that is sustainable, that creates a resilient market. It's very difficult. This is a 25-year-old debate. And so the WTO is stuck. When I come to Rome, they say, we can't talk about trade. When I go to Geneva, we can't talk about food policy. And here we are. What I can tell you in my informal meetings with trade delegates, member states in Geneva who negotiate the WTO, they agree. All different sides agree. The agreement on agriculture is outdated, and it's not broken. And more countries, major countries, are thinking more and more, maybe the WTO is not the place to have this conversation. Maybe I would add, the CFS is the place to have this conversation. Trade is so important, so key in trade policy, and yet we dance around it. And my final point, I'm just looking at because I don't remember what I wrote down. The issue of price volatility. This is here we are at the CFS because of price volatility. Remember 2007? It wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago. And yet we have not solved that issue. The structural problem is commodity deregulation in the Chicago markets. It's the deregulation of commodities that started in 2000 in the United States. It's because it allows for price speculation. Unless we address that's one very significant issue. We have to have the conversation. How do we stabilize prices? We still haven't figured that out since 2007. CFS was designed to deal with this. So I'll end with, this is really the place to do it, to turn ideas into action. There's lots of good ideas. And maybe I'll end on the last conversation between the CSIPM and the chair. I've seen many countries have fantastic ideas and have attempted to transform their food system, but because they ignored the process and they weren't inclusive and did not listen and respond to people's demands on the ground, the most clever idea, if it's run through a poor process, will cause more harm than good. So process matters. Inclusivity is not just a word. It's very difficult to figure out. So I would invite everyone to take that time to really think about how you do things is as important as what is to be done. Thank you, Chair, for your generosity as always.
Thank you, Michael, for explaining the comment on the chat. And we think with this last intervention, I would like to be concluding this substantive segment of our discussion. I'm really glad that this space we are consolidating as the substantive open space for discussing is taking the shape, to be quite honest, because we are able to discuss openly and accept different perspectives and different points of view without necessarily under the pressure of agreeing on a text or agreeing on a specific procedural issue related to the proceedings, formal proceedings of the committee. I think it is very rich to have the discussions. This is part of the value of the Committee on World Food Security. And Michael, you were saying that there are structural needs or issues to be addressed. I was once again thinking that the committee addressed these issues already in the past and agreed on food price volatility issues in the past as well. So maybe it's a good exercise to go back to what we agreed in the past. Of course, maybe not all is still valid, but this was backed by very time-consuming and many brains for governments and of different stakeholders and the United Nations were inputting on these negotiations, and an agreement was finally achieved in the past. So maybe it could be a good exercise to revisit some of these agreements and take stock of them. So, and of course adapt and help make our work for the last 10 years help us to achieve tough agreements at this point, because we agreed on these issues in the past. And of course, the CFS has the function, and I discussed also this with WTO during my visit in Geneva before Christmas, when we couldn't even imagine that this was coming and this war was going to be starting shortly. That I mean, indeed, there are spaces, of course, WTO or other on other issues, other arenas are the places in which all needs to be negotiated. No doubt about that. But that the CFS provides a space where things can be discussed and can be openly analyzed, and we can listen to different points of views. And always when WTO has been part of these proceedings, and this has been the case during the last, if I remember the last, this last joint Bureau and Advisory Group meeting, it has always been very, very instructive and very good to have this exchange and understanding the different points of view. When I met in Geneva before Christmas, some of the delegations, member states, permanent representatives, some of our peers, if I look to the member states' faces today in Geneva, there was a broad agreement that it was good to have discussions together, even having our PRs in Rome together with the PRs in Geneva at the same time, so that we understand better the issues in a more systemic way. So maybe whatever the CFS does in the coming weeks or months to face the challenges we are facing, it could be also a good idea to have to be breaking the silos within my government or our own governments and working at the same time, same place, even on the screen, analyzing some of these very important and difficult issues. So thank you once again to the whole, to all the participants in this very rich exchange. I think there are very important messages that are emerging and that we will be discussing tomorrow at the Bureau meeting. And probably one of the most important ones I see is that whatever we do, we need to do it through a conversation and through deliberation. And even if it's not possible to achieve an agreement in certain issues, we need to come together in different ways. With the UN system and the interagency coordination exercise. With our government, it is good if we share what we are seeing and what we think we need to do. And it would be extremely good if we find some, even not all, but at least some of the global policy responses that would be wise to advise and to take. Fortunately enough, the CFS is the space in which all the international organizations are also part in different ways, including the IFIs and including the whole of the United Nations system in different configurations, and of course always led by WFP, IFAD, and FAO. So we will continue this discussion, hopefully landing a bit more on what we will be doing at the CFS tomorrow at the Bureau. I think that when I speak on behalf of the Bureau to the rest of the participants today, I can see that it has been a very rich discussion. We have heard all the inputs from you very carefully, and that as always and as usual, we will have a very nice and very good and in-depth reflection probably tonight following what we heard today, so that we can make a more informed and more impactful decisions tomorrow. So thank you very, very much indeed once again. And now we will move to the second agenda item today. I haven't included it on the substantive discussion segment as such, because it has to do also more with, well, with a very important indeed work stream and or concern for the committee, but it has mostly implications on the procedural issues in the coming weeks. And well, first, my objective with this second item, which is briefing you and sharing with you some ideas that we will, of course, will be also discussing and deciding upon tomorrow at the Bureau, if appropriate, is an update on the work that or the progress that we are doing on the implications for the Committee on World Food Security of the UN Food System Summit, and how are we progressing on fulfilling the mandate by the plenary, which is providing further analysis and identifying possible actionable, if any, actions to be taken. So while you are fully aware, many of you are participants already of the group of friends that I convened to advance these deliberations. This group of friends met for the third time early this month on the 5th of April. My sense, well, probably you have seen already, because of course it's public and it has been actually posted at the website of the, and one of the documents that feed into this discussion. You have seen what I have called the options paper, which is the summary of what I have heard and received in written format or verbally from the membership of the committee, or from the participants, and from many conversations. This is our options paper was discussed by the group of friends on a first round early this month, as I was saying. And I sense that although we are not yet ready to discuss this formally at the advisory Bureau meetings or by the Bureau, I think that we are close, or a time close to be in a position of submitting or to elevating to, or whatever we can call it, to share with the Bureau and Advisory Group in the coming weeks a more consolidated paper on possible options, and have a discussion on this at the appropriate space, which is this, and then at the Bureau, and hopefully to be able to go back to plenary with some conclusions and proposed possible ways forward in this area. I'm especially happy with the fact that I see that we are increasingly agreeing and converging on some principles for guiding the possible actions by the committee in what relates to the UN Food System Summit. Well, first is that I sense that we recognize that the summit is very relevant to our mandate and to and its outcomes are, how the outcomes are defined, are indeed important for the Committee on World Food Security. This is a very important conclusion that I'm sensing that we are all aware of. The second one is that I think there's broad consensus that we will and we will need to operate always in tandem with the UN Food System Summit Coordination Hub, who has the mandate to follow up to the summit. And in these ways, be extremely careful to avoid overlaps, to avoid competition, and always seeking synergies and recognizing that the high-level political forum is the foremost fora and the link of the Food System Summit follow-up, and that whatever we do as the Committee on World Food Security has this as one of its overarching principles. And hence, that whatever we do is not just hand in hand with the UN Food System Summit Coordination Hub, if appropriate, is that it needs to be closely connected to the high-level political forum, which is the final or the ultimate depository of the Food System Summit follow-up, as many or several of you have suggested. So this is my overall summary and feedback I wanted to provide to you. Although I don't want to go in detail on the proposals that are contained and reflect on the options paper, because this is still work in progress, and we are still receiving the last feedback, written feedback and verbal feedback from you, or from the members of the group of friends, of course, on how to sharpen these options. Of course, you're more than welcome if you wish to comment now on some of these issues. But what is very important for us, or for the committee, at least at this point, is indeed to make some decisions that need to be taken soon, and probably tomorrow at the Bureau, or at least to receive the feedback from the Bureau to proceed on reacting to one very important invitation that the CFS received through the last group of friends meeting from the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, the coordinator Stefanos Fatoui, which is convening together a side event or an event in the sites of the high-level political forum this July that will probably focus on the national pathways and the progress of countries. This is my intention, and this is what I would really like to see. And of course, due to the process of the high-level political forum, logistics and organizations, if we go this way, and although this is not, or we don't need, the formal decision by the Bureau is not needed to organize a side event, I would very much like to have your input first, and then the discussion at the committee, at the Bureau of the committee tomorrow morning. So this is the first one that needs to be decided soon, so that we match together with the coordination hub, the requirements of the high-level political forum to organize such events. The second one that needs to be also decided now is how, at least the outline of how the Food System Summit would be tackled or addressed during our next plenary. And my proposal would be to consider these implications, to consider as the core of the special event at our plenary. This means on Thursday, if we look at the schedule, this is the special event that is not part of the formal agenda, but it's part of the session informally on the plenary. I would like to propose to the vote this special event to the follow-up of the Food System Summit, not as such as the follow-up per se, but putting our attention on what is going on also at the national level, at the country level, and maybe with the coalitions that emerge that are willing to do so. And the third one is, I would like to share with you the idea of approaching proactively the coalitions that emerge from the summit. I would do that as the chair to increase their engagement with the committee, more importantly with the use of the committee agreements, intergovernmental agreements, as part of their overarching framework of inspiring the coalitions or whatever they are doing, that they are making use and well aligned with the agreement that we have achieved in the committee previously. So these are the three items that I would like to be focusing on today and tomorrow, and for which I would like to seek your advice. Of course, as I said, and especially taking the opportunity that we have here today with the high-level panel of experts, although there is no direct implication on these three concrete steps we need to undertake very soon. You are very much welcome, Bernard, to take the floor if you wish on other of the issues related to this item. So now back to you. The floor is open for your inputs, for your ideas, for your discussions, etc. Yes, thank you, Bernard. I see your hands up, so the floor is yours, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to explain to the advisory board and bureau members what we are doing in that domain on the side of the steering committee of HLPE. We started the process last year, thinking about how HLPE within CFS could be strengthened. We explored possibility how to be visible in a better way and recognized in a better way as SPI within the food system as focus. We explored how to be recognized as scientific-based SPI institution within the CFS structure, how to increase the impact of our work with reports, issue papers, notes, briefs, conferences, etc. We elaborated a list of possible measures and tried to implement rapidly the low-hanging fruits, for example, in the communication domain. We have also identified that the size of our steering committee is crucial to carry an increasing workload and to have a better representation of global specific conditions and also scientific disciplines, scientific expertise. We will have also to deal with the question of the founding base of HLPE. As you know, the steering steering committee members participate pro bono, but more activities represent higher costs, also higher costs for the secretariat. We have also identified that there is a need for more flexibility and readiness for the elaboration of briefs, notes, issue papers on critical issues, on your requests or on your proposition, on our proposition to you, to the CFS. We have also to pay more attention in formulating recommendations which should be more context specific, and also pay more attention to the implementation of the recommendation in the sense of what is going on in different contexts. We speak about the follow-up efforts of the HLPE in that domain. Finally, we explore ways how we can participate in common projects together with other SPIs like IPCC or IPBES, and also in the coordination hub of FAO, as you mentioned, Mr. Gabriel Ferrero, just a few minutes ago. We could also realize that your document, the CFS document, makes proposition in the same directions. We are very happy about that, and we are grateful for the support we have from the CFS to go forward in that direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Thank you very much indeed for your reaction to the options paper. I'm glad to see that this captures the member states have captured some of your proposals, if not all, but some of the ways you are proposing. And I suggest, Bernard, that you participate actively on the discussions once they come to the Bureau Advisory Group meeting, hopefully soon, with a final version of the options paper that I will be putting forward. Thank you very much, Bernard. Now I'll give the floor to, I see Magdalena. I see a real Magdalena, I think, on the screen, which is very nice. Magdalena, sorry for the joke. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As CSIPM, while most of you, or if not all of you, know what have been our concerns regarding the UNFSS and the UNFSS follow-up, particularly in this moment of crisis, the prioritization of energies must be dedicated to addressing such a crisis. So this might shift a bit this prioritization of energies. Regarding the synergies that you have mentioned, Chair, between the CFS and the coordination hub, we have expressed our concerns regarding the hub and it not having a true political mandate or member states oversight, as opposed to the CFS, which is the normative space for food security and nutrition, and the space to advance the right to food for all. And we would like also here very briefly to recall that the huge issue of the UN Food System Summit follow-up within the CFS has also caused some divisiveness. Now, in this sense, with saying this last point, our strong demand today, Chair, is that the third proposal that you have mentioned a few minutes ago, that this proposal is set aside, that we do not consider this third proposal. Because we as CSIPM, we would like to contribute, Chair, to your ambition of rebuilding trust within the CFS and allowing the coalitions to enter the CFS space through proactively approaching them, however, highly risks exacerbating the divisiveness within the CFS. Mainly we see it due to the different and sometimes even opposing range of political orientations that these coalitions have, and also due to their lack of any multilateral legitimation, sorry. So Chair, these were our messages for today regarding the UN Food System Summit, and I hope you can consider our demand for the proposals you have made. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, for your statement on behalf of the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. And I take very careful note of the risk of not diverting energies in this situation. And whatever it's done, it's in full link with what's needed at this point for the response to the crisis. And maybe this link between the short, medium, and long issue is the proper way to go. I also take very careful note, Magdalena, about your strong views about not proactively approaching the coalitions. Thank you so once again. And now it's my pleasure, Rodney, to give the floor to you, the CGIAR. If you are ready, the floor is yours, Rodney.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me? No problem. Good. Look, on your first proposal, the HLPF joint side event, this sounds very sensible. I refer back to our discussion on the 5th of April, the Friends of the Chair, where Stefanos made that invitation. And of course, it plays into your item 2 in the options paper, the CFS convening power to support members in the implementation of their national pathways and strategies connecting to the hub. And of course, the hub, the principal role of the hub is indeed to develop work plans to support the implementation of those country strategies. So the complementarity is very clear. I would draw members' attention to David Nabarro's update on those country policy dialogues. I think most of us got that on the 24th of April, which emphasized how well some of those country dialogues are going. I mean, he referred there to, let me just get that paper, that first of all, the scale was very successful. 75% of the teams reported pathways connected to and used within political processes. 70% report visions and priorities incorporated within national policies and strategies. So it's the obvious format for the CFS to interact, building on your item 2 in the options paper. So strongly support your first and second recommendation. Let me now pick up on the worthy comments from the HLPE chief there. And I strongly support your items there, items 4 in the options paper. But the key concern, as the HLPE made, is that, of course, we need an increase in diversified resource base to put in place most of those recommendations. And you will remember, and most of us will remember, the exchanges with the science group of the UNFSS, where they implied that although the HLPE does a tremendous job, and I strongly support that, it's on a relatively limited resource base. So that's something that I hope the HLPE has been reflecting on in their meeting this week, and indeed may be brought up perhaps with the Bureau tomorrow. So thank you very much, Chair, for that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rodney, and for your feedback on the 3 ideas and on the options paper as well as such. As I did already with Bernard Lehmann, you would be really welcome to feed into the discussion on the options paper more in depth. Well, already as you are doing, by the way, and I thank very much indeed for your input, but also when we discuss in depth the options probably, hopefully soon. Thank you, Rodney, once again. Now I'll see the Special Rapporteur. Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reflect on the conversation that was had last meeting where Stefanos and members of the Coordination Hub were present. I think the Coordination Hub is reproducing a lot of the limitations that arose during the Food Systems Summit. One is that we're seeing that because the Food Systems Summit did not address the pandemic and the food crisis when it had a chance to, and it did not address the issue of global governance, how we make decisions, where we make decisions, and because it didn't address international trade, the Food System Coordination Hub is slow moving. It's quite slow moving in light of what is needed today. And as we had in our conversation earlier in this meeting, the time is now to act. 1. 2, the other problem that the hub has is it assumes that it is the place to make decisions. It's a coordination hub, but ultimately it's the CFS where member states exercise their power. And I saw that dynamic as I saw different international institutions bristle at the language of coming out of the CFS that the hub should do this and the FAO should do this and the WFP should do that. It is the member states' prerogative to speak in normative terms like that. And it is the CFS that is the forum to create that political will and that vision. So the hub may very well be an excellent place for interagency coordination for the UN in this sort of long-standing, slow-moving process. Fine, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately it's not the place to create a vision. It's blind, and the CFS can give it, if it wants, that vision. What concerned me, however, is the language that was coming out of the hub was treating the CFS as in a subordinate manner. It was not the language of partnership that was being proposed by the chair of the CFS. That's what concerned me, is that I don't know if the hub is really looking to the CFS as a partner or not. What I heard deeply concerned me. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, as usual, Michael. I was looking at on my screen if but I'm not sure if Stefanos Fatoui is still in the virtual. Oh yes, in the virtual room. But so I mean, he's more than welcome to take the floor if he wishes. But in the meantime, Michael, I would say, well, first, I think that it's very, very clear to the hub and to the supervising joint leaders of the Rome-based agency on their function, and to the Secretary General. It is, I think, it's very clear that the hub has not a normative mandate, and it's not a specialist agency, or it's not an intergovernmental committee. I think this is very clear, and they understand it that way. And at the same time, I think I can speak also on behalf of Stefanos when I say that, I mean, I put all my hand on the fire, as we say in Spain. I'm not sure if in English it's the same way of putting that, but I mean, I fully trust that we are absolutely understanding that we are working in partnership with Stefanos and with the hub. I have absolutely no doubt about it, not a single millimeter of doubt on that. So I'm very glad actually that we are working, well, not just in partnership, it is in partnership because we both understand the role of each other, and that we are complementary, and that basically the way you described it, Michael, is the way it is set up in the international framework. So, and that we also understand that both are needed, that the committee is the space, intergovernmental space, with a specific mission or vision that is spelled out on the reform document and on the basic rules of FAO. And the hub is it has its nature that we all know, and that, but with that both are needed, and that there is a strong need of focusing also on the longer term and helping countries to navigate this difficult transition to more equitable and sustainable food systems, respecting the full diversity of food systems at the country level, and even within countries, the full diversity of approaches and of uses and systems thinking is also taking the full picture, and not just generalizing that there's one single way of approaching sustainability. And at the same time, the CFS indeed it provides the membership and the member states in dialogue with the stakeholders and of the UN system, by the way, vision and normative frameworks together with specialist agencies, etc. So it's just my comment on that. So to be honest, I'm not at all concerned at this point with misunderstandings with Stefanos Fakhri, with the leader of the hub. I'm super glad that we're working together in such a right way, if I put it that way. But thank you in any case, Michael, of course, for your comments.